everyone. My name is John Wall. I'm here at the Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. And I'm very glad to welcome back what we can say, maybe an old-timer now.
Yeah, indeed.
Someone who has been in and out of Georgetown over the years, is currently on the faculty of Middle Tennessee State University, has done research and work throughout the Islamic world, from Malaysia to the Middle East to working on Muslims in America. And for purposes of today, today's presentation, he is the author of a newly published book, Changing Saudi Arabia, Art, Culture, and Society in the Kingdom. And the primary focus in this sense is the art and culture and society. And that means it's not necessarily political. It's not necessarily what the talking heads on television talk about all the time. And if it's not, I want to take just a minute to put the importance of what Sean is doing with the development of art and an art community and art movements in Saudi Arabia. The importance of what Sean has been doing is reflected in kind of the history of a part of Orientalism that that Edward Said didn't pay any attention to, and that is Western attitudes toward what gets called Islamic art. And I went through my old files and found my file in the mid-1970s. The Metropolitan Museum of Art opened what is really one of the largest exhibits of, quote, Islamic art in the world. And there was a review in the New York Times that kind of fit the stereotype that I just want to sort of share with you for a minute. And it begins, an immense bath of exquisite visual sensation, sometimes a little stunning in its swift shift of scale, and sometimes a little soporific in its endlessly intricate, decorative elaborations, now awaits the visitor in the new galleries of the Islamic art at the Metropolitan Museum, and so on. Then buried in it, the attitude, notwithstanding its obvious delights, we shall be a long time assimilating this latest Metropolitan Museums within a museum, not only because of its enormous size, but because for those of us who seek in art something besides a bath of pleasurable sensation, so much of what it houses is, frankly, so alien to the expectations and experience of Western sensibility. There is, first of all, the preponderance, and thus the problem, of what is known as the decorative arts in this installation. If you search for Islamic art, Googling or whatever, basically still, this is now the 1970s, it's almost half a century ago. It is still treated, Islamic art is still treated as decorative arts, colorful, overwhelming, and so on, rather than looking at what people are doing. And I can vouch on my own sake. In the early 1970s, my wife and I lived in Beirut for a year on sabbatical. And as I listen to and read what Sean has been doing, Riyadh of the second decade of the 21st century sounds a lot like the art community in Beirut in the early 70s. We're trying to break out of being, quote, decorative art into whatever one is going to be calling art.
Right.
And so I welcome Sean, and he will explain it all to us, but not quite all, because then you should get the book as well. And there are a few copies of the book. Do you want to say what they should do if they're...
If you're interested in purchasing a copy today, they can be purchased for $35. Unfortunately, we only accept cash. If you don't have cash, I can let you know how to purchase it online.
Yes, and this is my wife, Carrie Foley, who was kind enough to join me in Saudi Arabia when I did my research. and I cannot thank her enough for the support that she has provided me over the years, also traveling with me in many parts of the world to do my research. And if I can note earlier, this classroom has, and this room has specific significance to me. This was the first class that I took with Dr. Vol, Islam in Africa, many years ago at Georgetown. I noted back here the chalk that I guess suggests a different era of classroom.
That's right.
As well. But again, I very much appreciate that and you taking the time to join me today in your busy schedules, and everyone here. I know the week has been thrown up in the air a bit for many of us because of the winter storm that took place on Wednesday, and I thank you to take the time out of your busy schedules to come and to listen to what I have to say. This is, of course, an introduction to that as well. I'd also make a special note to Dave Ottaway, who was kind enough to join me both yesterday when I gave a talk and again today. So thank you for taking the time to join me, not once, but twice as well. On May 19th, 2017, Air Force One arrived in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, the city that Dr. Vol just mentioned, marking the start of President Donald Trump's first overseas visit as U.S. President. The three-day visit featured a series of bilateral and multilateral meetings on strategic issues, along with events highlighting cultural and social ties. One of the most important of the cultural events, Saudi contemporary art, was held at the Diwan al-Malik, the site of Trump's talks with King Salman and other world leaders. On the second day of the trip, the Saudi king accompanied the president on an official tour of the exhibit, which displayed the work of 40 Saudi artists. Television cameras carefully recorded the U.S. president and his wife, as you can see here, Melania, speaking with various male and female artists. Saudi journalists specifically focused on the picture on the right that you see there of President Donald Trump congratulating Abdullah Al Othman, one of the young artists featured in the show. Echoing the enthusiastic response of Saudi social media to Trump's visit to the exhibit, King Salman publicly stressed the importance of culture and art in Saudi Arabia and his personal support for Saudi artists. In America, we sometimes take artists formerly supported by the state to be lesser artists. But the Saudi king is not the only person to support these artists. They have widespread popular support and have earned the backing of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, or as many of you know, MBS, and even the late Jamal Khashoggi. The latter not only brought together a key group of artists, but also has adult children who are now part of the artistic movement. For many scholars of the kingdom, as Dr. Vol, of course, brought up at the beginning, and even some Arabs, the presence of a vibrant arts movement in the country comes as a surprise. In their view, most Saudis are intolerant, highly religious people who have sought to preserve their society's cultural and humbly Islamic traditions against modern art or any other manifestation of the contemporary world. These types of views reinforce the vision of the country that is entirely devoid of art, a view that was once voiced by T.E. Lawrence when he observed there was so little art that one could say Arab art did not exist, says this during World War I. One hears even a similar perspective among some Saudis. This vision has crept in. For example, writing in the daily Saudi newspaper Al-Sharq in 2013, Dr. Abdul Salam Al-Wayl declared, if we can say that there's a Saudi culture and it has value, in interesting phrasing, then we can say with high confidence that the contempt for the arts lies at the heart of its values. It's a remarkable thing to say about this culture. Even Hassan Minaj's recently well-regarded segments on the murder of Jamal Khashoggi and on his Netflix show Patriot Act, I'm sure some of you in the room know of that, overlooks the artistic movement. All the shows did, focusing instead on MBS and the kingdom's senior political leadership. By contrast, my speech today seeks to broaden our discussion of Saudi artists and their country, which is far too often defined by non-Saudis through the words of its national leaders. While such official pronouncements are of course essential to understanding global diplomacy, they are not as useful for analyzing other elements in the kingdom. In these contexts, Saudi artists, the subject of my book, again, Changing Saudi Arabia, Art, Culture, and Society in the Kingdom. You can get a couple of copies in the back if you want, in this context. And they're essential, these artists that I discuss in this book. Why? For they permit us to transcend the dialectical structures that exist in most Western discussions of Saudi Arabia, frameworks that Edward Said wisely warned us to avoid in his work Orientalism. As I have learned during my extensive in-country and online research for my book, the Saudi creative class is in touch with a powerful national force, the deep consciousness of the country's masses who now live in the country and must deal on a day-to-day basis with the issues that emerge from living in a society and dealing with both its diversity and its contradictory elements. What is their country? What Saudi Arabia emerges from their perspectives that frames what I'm looking at. Finally, the artists who I talk about today do not represent the policies of the state. They are not dogmatic. Rather, they engage their audience in a surprisingly open dialogue in which various and often contradictory elements are in vehement discussion. And as we think about this for a moment, I want to point out to you this picture that you see here. This was on the Saudi internet, on Saudi social media over the last couple of weeks. Its artist is unknown. It's an anonymous artist with that as well. And you can see the various forces at work just in this one work of art. We can see, of course, in the foreground here, Edward Munch, the scream. I'm sure many of you have heard of this, have seen this painting before. Again, the famous work, almost emblematic of modernity, of this idea of a person screaming and dealing with the world. But also looks like someone doing what? Anyone thought what this is like? Anyone thought like this? What is?
Oh, leading the khutbah.
Yeah, doing what? The call to?
Prayer, the azan.
Yeah, that same thing. It's a remarkable moment. One of my colleagues when I was in graduate school here at CCAS, one of the people I worked with, pointed that out. She actually had an image of that in her office. And it's sort of a remarkable moment. Liz Kepperly mentioned that when I was there, and I always think of that. So again, this is sort of prototypical Western modernity. You see it right there. Let me get this back with the pointer for a moment. This is it, Western modernity. But that Western modernity is within a picture, within a clearly mosque Islamic setting. You seemingly have contradictory forces back and forth in the same place. And of course, note at the bottom here, maybe hard to see, you see the Quran with the Quranic stand right there as well. Sort of in them, the person's leading the prayer in this context. You can see this well. How do these two forces interact? How do many of those people, and again, I'm sure some of you know, many Saudis have studied the United States. How do they reconcile these different forces in their lives? Again, it's just a taste of what we'll be talking about today. Okay. At the turn of the 21st century, and I should note, everyone's following me so far? Yes? We're good? All right. Always got to ask. The capital of Asir, and this is a southern province in southern Saudi Arabia, as Dave knows, I talked about yesterday about southern Saudi Arabia. This is this area down here, multiple provinces. A Saudi province, Asir, it's located right down here near the border with Yemen. Business and government interests began to seek new ways to diminish the influence of what they saw as religiously conservative forces that had dominated the country since 1979. In meetings with officials of the British and American educated scholar, Prince Khalid Faisal, the governor of Asir, voiced his belief that there was an urgent need to both educate and broaden the worldview of Saudis, especially those living in the South. The events of September 11, 2001 sent a shockwave. Why? 4 of the 15 of the bombers were from the South. From Hamis Mushaik was one in Asir, next to Abha, and also 2 from Jazan. So there's 4 from down here. And this came as an enormous shock, because most of the members of Al-Qaeda from that point had been from Jeddah, Riyadh, Dammam. This area of the country had produced many of the bombers, and this sent a message. Indeed, many people at Senate and government had seen the South as a more loyal part of the country and not one that would necessarily produce Al-Qaeda bombers. To address this problem, the prince created new cultural institutions in Asir, including, as you can see here, the Al-Miftaha Arts Village, a vast complex in Abha that provided studio space to the community. There, 5 young Saudi male professionals with no training in art, you can see these guys here they are meeting, were introduced remarkably by Jamal Khashoggi, who was both a prominent supporter of the Al-Miftaha Arts Village and the editor of Al-Watan, a Saudi newspaper based in Abha and also sponsored by Prince Khalid. Over time, the 5 young men formed a majlis, You can see here, this is a sitting group, you can see there. There they are using the hookah and the different types of things. There they are spending a significant amount of time where they held a group discussion, where they talked about everything. Art, culture, the influence of the media, and the power of images to shape opinion in the world, using the internet, which had just been introduced in the kingdom only a few years earlier. These young men gathered as many articles and books about art, sometimes taking long times to download them from slow internet speeds, as they could, and shared it among themselves and talked about art in these settings. Out of these discussions, there emerged a new worldview for creating art, which synthesized art from home and abroad, explored cultural and social issues, drew on the online world, and created common social space. Rather than utilizing the Western framework, in which an artist works in a studio on his or her own, creating art as God created the world, they looked at the creation of culture, and of art in particular, as a process that involves many people, beginning with this small group, right, and exploring it out to the larger society. What also set the work of this new generation of Saudi artists apart was its exoteric nature. In other words, they did not assign meaning or truth to their art. Rather, they left that up to the audience, or more broadly, to Saudi society at large. They're already beginning from the beginning to think about how their work is going to be understood by others. As one of the artists, Abdel Nasser Garam, has said, he and his colleagues were not picking sides. Instead, they were trying to be a mirror to society. But did that not mean that the artist did not want that mirror to serve a greater good, to inspire reaction and change? Sometimes when you become a mirror as an artist, you can say he's tweeting this on Twitter. Sometimes when you become an artist as a mirror and they show you who they are, they get upset. And there's this clear desire to bring a reaction out to this. We're mirroring you, we're showing you what's going on. And you can see this type of thing, this type of thought process in one of Matar's pieces. This is called the evolution of man. You can see here, it begins as a gas tank, and what does it emerge into? You can see a man. What does he have here? Anyone see this here? What is that? To his head. That's a
Pistol.
pistol. Right? You can see that image. Why would Matar come up with this? Matar was a unique artist. Most of the people who were involved in this movement had no prior training as artists. He was actually a doctor. He was an emergency room physician who saw thousands of scans like this, thousands of things like this, and so had that image. You can see that in that context. And indeed, as an artist, he imagined himself not as an artist, but almost as an artist merged with the doctor, whose role in society as an artist was akin to that of a doctor, providing a diagnosis, working on society's behalf. You can see that in his work. By taking that approach, the artist invited further discussion about the real meaning or meanings of those work. Those discussions effectively extended to the process of creating art and culture beyond the group, so that society could have a say in creating culture and be invested in it. Over time, this process transformed the 5 artists and those who followed them, allowing them to adopt a role akin to Antonio Gramsci's famous concept of organic intellectuals, namely, individuals who, through the language of culture, express the experiences of their society in ways that could not be easily replicated by academia, business, or the media. Ambiguity had an important benefit for these artists, for it offered them a mechanism to explore sensitive cultural, political, and social topics while still claiming to be apolitical. And again, you can see that very clearly here, right? Is he talking about gas? Is he talking about something else? What meaning you could do? You could infer a meaning here. But again, he's not telling you what it is. He's allowing you to come up with that. Furthermore, the artist treated the conservative social norms of their society, which many of us in the West assume are an impediment to art. We assume you can't produce art in a system that does not have freedom as we define it, as a key source of inspiration, transforming what we would see as a negative into a positive. As Ahmed Matar, the person who created this piece, said, "It is more interesting to be an artist surrounded by challenges like ours than to be an artist surrounded by too much choice and unrestricted opportunity." Again, he prefers to be in the setting where he has more restrictions, which allows him to force him to think, how do I talk about oil or other things in its reflection in Saudi society? How do I create this and make it work in this setting? How do I get the reaction that I want? An essential moment for Matar and his colleagues was Garam's decision in 2008 to listen to others in a meeting of a photographic collage that you see here, Sirat. The collage displays ruins of a modern bridge, which had been devastated by a flash flood in 1980 at considerable loss of life. Such collapses were all too common in Saudi Arabia at the time, and later were a major issue of public debate after the catastrophic floods in Jeddah in 2009. I'm sure some of you in your room have heard of this. Garam further added to the power of the piece by showing the bridge heading off into what? The abyss, right? You can see that going up there. And also painting the word Sirat. You can see in multiple things. He also adds red here in different colors as well. Now, of course, Sirat, as I'm sure many of you know, means a road-like path. But it also can be a path to what? The other side. And as I'm sure all of you know, or many of you know, the word has great religious significance for Saudis because it's part of the Surah Al-Fatiha, the opening words of the Quran. Again, guide us to the straight paths. These are all operating, religious, secular, all kinds of things in this concept. I should add, by the way, the company that built this was Bin Laden Construction Group. Just adding to the level. Yeah, just adding, picking this bridge. Now, only weeks before the start of the first exhibit of modern Saudi artists in London, it was a big deal, a group of Islamic scholars in Saudi Arabia protested that Garam's piece gave viewers a license to walk on the words of Islam. This, of course, was not a meaning that Garam intended, but asserting his role as a modern artist who could define the meaning of his own work was perilous, for it risked launching a debate in which modern Saudi art might be labeled un-Islamic, for promoting the notion of artist as God. Consequently, Garam agreed to provide the show an entirely new piece. You can see here a giant rubber stamp, modeled on the official ones he frequently used to mark his paperwork. And at that time, Garam was not only an artist, he was also an official, an officer in the Saudi army. And you can see here, it too has a series of things. It says, have a bit of commitment, you can see here, amen. Right? And again, remember, this is an official stamp, stamping down. What does that mean in that context as well? Thanks to Garam's decision to remove Sirat, the 2008 show was a success, helping to lay the foundation for the future of arts in the kingdom and removing all doubt about whether the movement was organically linked to Saudi society. It was a powerful decision. And in fact, for Saudi artists, many years later, you hear them talking about this being an inspirational moment. Saying, look, this is us defining what our moment is. It should be noted that later Garam will use that word Sirat. You actually use the Surah Al-Fatiha in another piece also called Capital Dome, sort of almost reflecting in that as well. That show, the one in 2008, helped to attract artists throughout the kingdom to the movement that had been born originally in Abha. Two artists of worthier note here, for they helped to bring new technology into the Saudi artistic community. Technology that would allow Saudi artists to communicate directly with the masses for the first time. And again, by this point, 2008, 2009, we've moved from an era of dial-up modems to something more with cell phones and also with online media and, more importantly, social media. And that's going to impact what happens. Street artist Salah Mohana Al-Abdali, as you can see here, gained fame in the kingdom by using social media to post graffiti pictures that featured a road sign into Mecca. You can see there, right? In which she replaced the Kaaba by a giant group of buildings. Again, this is playing on multiple images, including massive construction that was taking place at the time in Kaaba, near the Kaaba in Mecca, that had been a significant issue within the kingdom and the broader Islamic world. She sees social media as a vehicle, and this is important, to start a discourse between people, telling CNN in 2013, I didn't want it to be a beautiful artwork. I wanted to create debate. People took photos of my work and shared them on Facebook and Twitter. And you can see what they're doing with social media. They're transforming initially, which had been, sort of the majlis, a group of people, into a much larger discussion, effectively turning Twitter into a form of a national majlis. This is something that they'll be doing over a much larger period of time. By contrast, Abdallah al-Shahri, known widely as Shawish, went one step further by turning to social media to publicize and get positive and negative feedback on his work, just as one might do again in a modulus, but that would be impossible to do in the streets. Through this process of online criticism, Shaweek has created striking pieces. Again, you can see this here. This is one of my favorites. It's called Darth of Arabia. You can see there as well, where he added, as you can see here, Darth Vader to a picture of Amir Faisal, of course, visiting the Versailles Peace Conference in 1919. The conference, which determined the boundaries of modern Middle East, symbolizes for many Arabs the nefarious role of Western imperialism in the region. And it should be noted he's also implicitly doing something else. There's been a great rivalry between this family that now rules Jordan and of course the family of Saudi Arabia as well. So there's implicitly something as well. And it should be noted that one of Sheffrey's other pictures, where he had actually the Emir Faisal at that time signing the United Nations Charter with Yoda next to him, actually got into a Saudi textbook a couple of years ago as well. This sort of shows he's flowing in. It became a great controversy as well. Okay. Another important artist this generation is Ara al-Naami. She's Matar's wife. Like her husband, al-Naami was raised in Asir, finding a ready home at Al-Matafa Arts Village, where in 2004 she won the Southern Regional Arts Award, one of the many institutions that Prince Khalid had set into place. Her most important work, among the most important work, is Never Neverland. And this was done in 2014, so multiple years before the emergence of women being able to drive in the country. And portrays women at various rides in Abha, again that same city, capital of Asir, at an amusement park with the title Never Neverland. You can see that there. The most provocative of these series, which was completed in 2014, again before women could drive, are videos and photographs that show women driving bumper cars. Again, you can see here. As Al-Naami has noted, these images of bumper cars have drawn fierce reactions online, and because they raised the subject of what? Women driving. For years, one of the most sensitive issues in Saudi society before it was legalized in 2018. Can we take a moment to pause and let's see if I can get this right here. Like the hand back there? Yeah, that's one of my favorite videos. You can see, and she's operating at so many levels here with this picture, right? You can see different women are traveling, they're moving around. Also, some of you may know in Saudi Arabia, many men drive very, very quickly. Again, this is an issue in Saudi culture and society. You can see that as well. Women have freedom to move. You also see the diversity of women, right? In that shot. Different types of women, some are covered, some are not. That handbag also talks about issues of wealth and other things. All are in that shot, in that context. And it's moving in multiple directions. And the title itself, right, Never Neverland, reinforces that, what do you think, what's going on here? But of course she can back up and just say, hey, it's just women in bumper cars. I'm not talking about other things, right? I think. Okay. In the early 2010s, Al-Naami joined Edge of Arabia, one of the new private national art organizations, and showed her work at a series of galleries. These are private galleries, like Al-Athar Gallery in Jeddah, that's from 2013, and Desert Designs at Dhahran and the Eastern Province. There, Najala Al-Sahaimi and Ramin Bukhari devised Loud Art, an initiative designed to democratize art galleries, often viewed as what? Elite spaces, both here in the West, but also. And she did so by exhibiting works that sold for as little as $20 or $30, far lower than found in other Saudi or Western galleries. Thanks to Loud Art, a new artistic culture emerged in Dhahran, where, in Bukhari's words, anyone can attend and everyone can buy. Again, this is a specific idea of taking, again, the matches is one thing, they everybody participate, but allowing people to take part. And look at these pictures. Sort of remarkable pictures. This is 2013, Al-Athar Gallery, the different people. Look at Desert Designs and Al-Hobart in 2017. Again, mixed both men and women, you can see in this context, in these remarkable pictures as well. And again, remember one other thing. Today we have movie theaters in Saudi Arabia, and you can show a movie in a different context. What makes a piece of art and an artwork different is that you only have one piece of art, which means that if you're going to show it to everybody, people have to all be there at the same time. It's a remarkable thing, and it's done specifically with broadening up and democratizing as well. Ramin is a remarkable woman in her own right, was actually just awarded one of the BBC's top 100 women in the world. And you can see with this type of work, they can do that. This vision of broadening access to arts would also be adopted by a new generation of Saudi artists working in a different medium. They were interested in exploring many of the same questions as artists in Asir had explored, but through stand-up comedy. This new generation, many of whom had actually studied in the States, believed that existing modes of comedic self-expression both failed to reflect their own worldviews and the worldviews of important groups of society. Not surprisingly, they were among the first to recognize and respond to the fact that there was a pent-up demand in the kingdom for cultural content that better reflected the views of Saudis, and that could go beyond the limitations of existing tools to voice social critique. To meet this demand, men like Hisham Faki and later women went to stand-up comedians that blended the kingdom's cultural norms, including a long tradition of artistic expression, with artistic norms from other cultures, especially American stand-up comedians of color. Echoing Ahmed Matar's insight about the inherent advantages of producing art in a conservative social setting rather than one of unrestricted opportunity, stand-up comedians have also embraced the boundaries of Saudi society, seeing it as an aid rather than a hindrance for their work. Again, the same idea that we're in this conservative setting that we in the West would view as a hindrance to art, in their view, it works out better for them. The system, noted leading Saudi comedian Hisham Faki in 2017, has to have the right amount of restrictions and right amount of freedom for it to work, to be like that golden spot. Thanks to this balance of forces, he noted, in Saudi Arabia, there's a symbolic relationship between the artist and where he or she comes from. This is an Instagram post from last year. Hisham gave a lecture to one of my classes at Middle Tennessee State University, and it was on an art. There was actually a film he was actually just in called Baraka Meets Baraka. If some of you haven't seen it, I encourage you to see it. It's a great film. Glad you've seen it as well. It's a wonderful film. And one of the first things they asked him, they said, look, you seem to be more Western and modern. And again, he'd gone to school at Florida State University. He also has a degree from Columbia, elite schools. And then someone responded, this is an amazing thing. We'd never talked about this directly on Twitter or in person. And he said this: the talk was fun. I made sure to listen to their questions so I could properly read the room and respond. They asked about what traditional Saudis sought of my work. I made sure to emphasize the need for nuance, and that the value systems are not always in contention with each other, but rather exist in parallel ways. I talked about neoliberalism, privilege, and civic identity. This is a remarkable statement. We'd actually never talked about this, but this is something that I found again and again in Saudi art. This basic idea, again, the symbol of multiple images, seeming contradictory images, in the same place. And this violates, again, one of our fundamental tenets of scholars. We think of the Hegelian dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, that oppositional forces have to be in conflict automatically, and then lead maybe to a synthesis. There's many things that have been written on Saudi Arabia that makes that argument. But what Faki is arguing here is that these contradictory or oppositional value systems are not always necessarily in contention. There might be a context in where they exist side by side in peace, or some sort of level of tension that does not necessarily result in war or the need for implicit change. It's something to think about in that context. The comedy that emerged from this consciousness was often as exoteric as the work of Garms, functioning in the same way that an abstract painting does. Notably, stand-up comedy is most often performed in interactive group settings where everyone is expected to participate. Jokes often contrast multiple ways of viewing a subject or assign meaning to it and tie humor that is both highbrow and lowbrow. Comedians provide just enough information for the audience to use its imagination to fill in the blanks. This type of ambiguity reinforces a key strength of Saudi stand-up comedy. The listeners are not supposed to take the comedian's work too seriously. This gives the comedian the opportunity to pretend that what they are saying is only a joke, absolving them of any responsibility of them for any adverse consequences that might come from what that joke means. For Saudi comedy, these types of structures were necessary because it was not just the state versus society dynamic that was an important factor, again, something talked about again and again about these societies. Like the Saudi visual artists, the comedians have also had to consider their relationship with both state and their diverse and complicated, conservative and multifaceted society. At the same time, Saudi stand-up comedians have their jokes have higher purpose, namely they see themselves as being a mirror and provoking reaction and social change. Ultimately, Saudi stand-up comedian Ali Khathami has noted, his and his colleagues' work is positive because it encourages the viewer to critique and question rather than passively receive. Starting in the late 2000s, Khathami and other stand-up comedians engaged in a mass Saudi audience in a way that would have been unimaginable to the Al-Muftaha artists in two key ways. First, they staged large stand-up shows that drew as many as 11 or 12,000 people. Huge shows. This is a famous comedian, I'm going not too far out, that's named Mississippi Ibrahim. A comedian, again, using that term Mississippi to linking it back to the United States. You can guess an idea what some of his jokes touch on. You can see this is a large show. You can see there, again, these are shows, it's sort of the only thing of its size, and this mass thing would be like a football game or a soccer game at major stadiums. And it has the same feel of it, someone who's been to both of those things. That's the first thing. These are huge shows, and they're advertised a lot on Saudi social media. That's what get all these people to show up to it as well. Second, stand-up comedians found a series of private media companies that made original content viewed millions of times on YouTube, a medium that effectively became a new form of television. After YouTube's advertising policy in 2009 permitted the placement of ads within videos, media companies like Telfaz 11 or Meerkat became very profitable through partnerships with leading domestic and foreign companies. They've made a model that worked, and you're seeing a transition from people who work in one industry and then also as artists to people who actually have enough money to spend much of their time focusing directly on the arts. And indeed, Faki and others, and Al-Khathami, had all also been trained in other fields as well, and they go into the arts. The media companies are going to utilize their new wealth to produce new shows to transform what was possible to discuss in Saudi society, taking full advantage of the fact that while the internet was regulated in the kingdom, it didn't have the filters that existed on state and satellite television at that time. A good example of this process is U-Turn show, Al-Attire, On the Fly, a new style and variety show starring Omar Hussein. You can see there, a stand-up comedian whose stand-up routine, you can actually see these online, and covered homosexuality and other issues that have long been seen as taboo in the kingdom. In fact, when he gives those jokes, he actually gives those jokes wearing a pink shirt. Imagine that for a moment. With that. The show covered current events in the kingdom and the wider world, but it did so in ways that was very different from the approach of any news program in the Arab world. While Arab news anchors deliver information as figures of authority, using Fusha, or formal Arabic, Hussein adopted the type of everyman character who spoke on behalf of ordinary Saudis. He and his guest characters not only spoke Amiya, the colloquial Arabic of the country's speech, but often formed comedic teams, with Hussein playing the straight man to a series of crazy Saudi characters. Hussein regularly appeared on camera in a thobe, you can see there, or the long robe worn by Saudi men, but without the shmug, the head covering worn in formal or professional settings. At the same time, Hussein telegraphed his piety by using clearly Islamic language. This was an astute choice for Hussein, who delivered his news and jokes in front of a large backdrop of nighttime Jeddah. As you can see here, there's Jeddah with its famous fountain there in the back that you can see there as well. And this, of course, is a cosmopolitan Red Sea port city that many Najdi Saudis have dismissed as far too cosmopolitan. Again, using a word often translated as sea vomit in some ways you can hear to describe that. It gives you an idea of just some of the tensions. Still, much like Saudi visual artists, Hussein has built a large fan base from across the society, including many people in Riyadh as well. By July 2013, he had almost 500,000 followers on Twitter, an impressive number for a country of less than 30 million people. He's building a very large base. No less innovative was Al Attiyar's staff of writers and actors, beginning with Omar Hussein's wife, Lama Sabri, the chief writer. Another one of the show's regular staff writers is a woman, Dima Ikhwaner, who was one of the staff writers. These women brought unique perspectives and skills to comedy writing. For Sabri is a psychologist and Ikhwan is an economist. A woman from the Hijaz also appeared on screen, playing strong figures, which is very different than many other Saudi television comedy shows, which used non-Hijazi actresses to portray the region's women often in negative ways. Another one of the successful Saudi media companies, you can see these two figures there, another successful Saudi media company was 80s. Thanks in part to a series of videos produced and directed by Majid Al-Issa, one of the country's most remarkable directors, and he's from the center of the country. Those videos mix Western music with Saudi cultural genres, especially Samri. Has anyone heard of Samri? It's an ancient dance, Saudi folk dance, accompanied by the Saudi daf drum, and set to poetry in which participants can look as if they're possessed. This is often done at night. Through these combinations, Al-Issa has created musical collages, which call to mind the visual work of Garam and Matar, or even stand-up comedy, by blending Samri with Western musical norms and cultural symbols. Indeed, Al-Issa has combined these cultural forces to reach as diverse an audience as possible. For instance, Samri King that you see here, produced in 2015, we see Saudi men dancing to Samri music, while either in Saudi or hip-hop clothing. Many of them also are wearing masks. You can see our gorilla mask, you can see different types of masks. You can see Obama mask there as well, frog head, you'll see other things as well. As part of their costumes, the young men carry or have a series of Saudi cultural symbols, a hara and other things, and hip-hop symbols, such as a baseball cap, and as you'll even see, a handgun. The music and words of their songs, which were written by a leading Saudi poet, Suleiman bin Shafrain, are presented as a collage. As a representative of 80 Studios told journalist Charles Akel, Al-Issa aimed to revive an old Saudi musical genre, the Samri, this is an ancient tradition, by making it catchy, by speeding up its rhythm and westernizing the melody. Let's take a look at that video. See that as well. First, let me mention there are actually videos that ABS has done showing Western students, I think it's at Georgetown's campus in Qatar, watching videos of Samri and sort of seeing their reaction to these people going nuts, and partly where this came from. But I should know one other thing. What's the Arabic word for king? Everybody know that word?
Malik.
Malik.
No.
Okay. See that word there? Anybody can see? There's Majalisa. There's Samri. What's that? Kink. Right. Is that the word at Malik? The same thing? No, it isn't. Absolutely. He's going to draw on a strategy, this is sort of remarkable, of Saudi visual artists who frequent use to absolve their responsibility for the meaning of the titles. Again, he's going to serve a meaningless... Is kink an Arabic word that has any real meaning? Is it going to be in Hans Ver? No. I'm not going to find that in the Hans Ver Fusha dictionary. But do people know what that meaning is? Absolutely. Why? The title assumes that the Saudi audience has a sufficient knowledge of English, right, to understand kink is not the Arabic gibberish, but rather a transliteration of an Arabic word with a clear meaning. That was a safe assumption in 2015, since English had become a popular language among many levels of Saudi society, not just elites, thanks in part to the King Abdullah Scholarship Program that had sent thousands of Saudi men and women in the United States and other English-speaking countries. And indeed, he can use this term to say that it's that Samurai king, but he's not referring to the king of Saudi Arabia. You can see in this context is what that means. Again, you'll see that term referred to in other contexts, like drifters, for instance, where there's drifter kings. But again, you can see that there. Both Samurai King and other recordings that Isa has done have been collectively viewed more than 88 million times on YouTube. Again, this is another one we'll talk about for watches. This is a number that has nearly tripled the population of the kingdom. Clear proof that the young Saudi director is an organic intellectual who can channel both the experiences and views of the masses. Remarkably, one video, however Chaste, which uses piano music and samurai music together, sort of Western and together, and Eastern or Saudi music, was viewed nearly 740,000 times with the first month after it was posted on YouTube. A number of things. Thus, it should come as no surprise that two works of art which combine Western and Saudi cultural norms were released on time, played a role in the debate on women driving. Again, one of the most sensitive issues in the kingdom over the last decade. The first, of course, was No Woman, No Drive, a satirical music video released in 2013. I'm sure some of you have seen it in the room. It got a lot of play in the West, which starred both Hisham Faki and others at Telfaz 11. You can see them there. It was a video actually sung in English, but you can see at the bottom it has both translations, both with English as well as Arabic there as well. And also, I should note, the second major video is Hawajis, or Concerns. Does anyone see this? This came out in late 2016, which was a satirical video about a group of Saudi women who are driving. You'll see that, and also dance, and they're on skateboards as well. And the two satirical videos, which have been viewed on YouTube more than 35 million times, receive extensive coverage outside of the kingdom. And again, hundreds of articles, video programs, other things about these two works, and they reveal both the global appeal of Saudi art, and more importantly, its role as a barometer of the prevailing cultural and political winds in the country. And the Hawajis one is even more remarkable because it's actually done entirely in Arabic. The videos, this one is translations in English and Arabic, that one is done entirely in Arabic and shows just how powerful a force this can be, both at home and abroad. For their part, Saudi artists have continued to pursue new opportunities at home and abroad, including partnerships in certain cases with business and government entities, which have tried to provide strong incentives for them to receive funding, or at least support, while retaining their integrity as artists. For instance, you can see here, Ahmed Matar accompanied Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to a conference in Beijing in 2016, where he presented a piece, you can see here, that celebrated the history of Chinese relations with the Arab world. It's a huge piece. On one side has the Hajj and other things. You can see the Silk Road there as well at the bottom, different types of images. 6 months later, he was appointed director of a national art institute linked to a nonprofit. Mirkat and Telfaz 11 have continued to produce powerful social commentary, one that you see there, even after receiving substantial investments from private firms in 2015 and 2018 respectively. So again, this process is still very much going on. Other artists have traveled to the West, where they have studied art and film, and as we'll see in a moment in the case of Tom Tom, joined actually the Western entertainment industry. Last year, she partnered with Saudi director Michelle Al-Jasser, a man also starting art in Los Angeles film, for a music video that's going to explore marriage and gender in Saudi Arabia. It's in English. It's meant for a Western audience, but also touches on distinctly Saudi issues, including that of driving. Let's take a look at that and we'll talk for a moment about it afterwards.
Started at 11, I would look up at the heavens and cry. Told me not to think ahead, I was lying in my bed wondering why. I would never listen, no, I had a vision, it's true. And I knew nothing that I can do, I hit the ground.
piece, isn't it? And did anyone see the sort of other cultural images? I was talking with Andrew about this beforehand, that you saw in that piece, that you saw in other pieces you saw. There were cultural things as well. And did people also see the sort of clearly Saudi cultural examples, the dates, for instance, and other things associated with weddings? And who pulls her in to the wedding? Did anyone catch that? Who's the hand who pulls her into marriage? It's the mother, right? Again, as women who've gone to Saudi weddings know, in the back of the room, the women part of the wedding, there are all these matchmakers with mothers looking to find brides for their sons. It's a key part of society. You can see in that picture. Is anybody else wanted to comment on that before I go further? Sort of a powerful piece. Okay, let me get moving on that. Just thought it's something that hit me very hard. She's a remarkable director. Oh yeah.
What struck me the most was in the wedding, how everyone was having fun
Except
for the
her.
bride.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which is also itself an image. What is that supposed to make you think about her and the choice that she's had to make?
It was something to please society, not her.
Yeah, which raises some interesting questions by itself. Yeah, about women as well, about them. And again, she's writing, and it's also, I should note, she is of course writing the music, but it's directed by a man, which gives it an additional level of credibility. Thinking about that, and again, Michelle Jesser is someone whose work I've written about in the past, and someone who's powerful. And Tom Tom is herself a rising star, and we're hoping to get her to Washington at one point soon, which would be something a lot of fun. Okay, thank you for sharing that comment. By the time Rise was released, the kingdom's online and artistic community had become a single national movement. Today, visual artists and comedians and even directors, as you can see here, Ahad Kamal, look to culture as a vehicle for transforming society indirectly from the bottom up, looking to art rather than violence for salvation. This strategy is in part worked because Saudi artists reject a central tenet of Western history and modernity. When we hear again and again these days in Washington and beyond by many on television, that tribalism should be abandoned in favor of individualism. Again, other people think other things as well. That has been a critical choice, for tribalism and religion are viewed with suspicion by many intellectuals in the West. Yet individualism has its weaknesses, just as tribalism and religion have their strengths. Yet, the latter, in fact, even addresses some of the problems inherent in the format, as in the lonely crowd. The people I've been discussing today wish to maintain elements of tribalism while functioning in the contemporary secular world in which individualism is paramount. All these different identities. You can see this Khalid Maas, a comedian, the comedy club you can see here in Jeddah. If you have not seen Ahad Kamal's movie Sanctum, which is actually available on the web, which talks about individual women and her choices, but also how a society, she plays a woman who is pregnant and whose husband suddenly dies and she's an orphan. And how a society that portrays its values, how does it solve it for her or not solve her issues, is a powerful image you can see in this context. Worth thinking about. Again, all these different contexts. That paradox, this idea of functioning, maintaining elements of tribalism while functioning in the temporary world with individualism, provides a powerful lesson for observers of Saudi Arabia and its society, politics and society. If scholars limit their focus to the men and the women at the forefront of society, they may miss many of the instrumental creators who build virtually everything. Cultural and mass opinion are shaped by the art that a society generates, although that process often happens secret or without explicit assertion, at least away from public view. Saudi artists aspire to be, to use Shelley's famous phrase, the unacknowledged legislators of their country. They begin by bringing complex issues into the spotlight of art and of laughter. Thank you very much for your time.